Thank you, Sean. Welcome everyone today, and for the audience out on Zoom, we'll get that presentation going in a second. So I just want to begin with a land acknowledgement. Oh, that didn't translate as well, but I'll just read it to you. I respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional homelands of the Kalispel, Kootenai, and Coeur d'Alene nations who continue to live and care for these lands, its waters, and its native plants and wildlife. We offer our thanks to these indigenous people, their history and cultures, as well as their continuing care for these lands for the generations to come. Just want to tell you about upcoming programs. Program in March, March 15th, it's going to be right here in the library, same room. It's going to be Gail Boland, one of our long-term members, chair of the landscape committee, talking about designing landscapes using native plants. Our April program will be on the 26th, and it's going to be, that's the fourth Saturday. It's not here. It's going to be at Community Hall, and it's going to be Phil Huff back there in the back talking about working for 20 years for wilderness as an executive director of the Friends of the Scotchman's Peak Wilderness. Okay. And for those of you, if you admit this person, we've got about 20 some people on Zoom out there from various parts of the country, even from Michigan, I think someone. Okay, if you're not a member, you can become a member, nativeplantssociety.org. You can learn more about all of our programs, what we do there. Follow us on Facebook, become a member, make a donation. We can always use help with that, with our education programs, the Arboretum, and all the other stuff we try to do for the community and our region. Okay. Let me get on with another admit here. Okay. Okay, well, this a number of years ago, I invited the director of sustainability from Eastern Washington University to come and talk about their Palouse Prairie restoration on the campus of Eastern Washington. And so today it's more about the Palouse. So well, I lived there for 30 years. I have a very fond love for the Palouse and that beautiful ecosystem that, every time I've gone up to the top, some of Kamiak Butte I've looked at, I've wondered what it would look like if it was native plants. And it's always just wheat fields. They're beautiful, but it's not, I'm sure it's not the same. So I would like to introduce our program for today. Urban Pocket Prairies, setting the stage for large-scale Palouse Prairie restoration. It's going to be presented by Chris Duke here. And let me tell you a little bit about Chris. He holds a PhD in biology from Washington State University, an MS in biology from Syracuse, and a bachelor's in zoology from Western Washington University. Chris is currently serving as the executive director of the Phoenix Conservancy and is one of its co-founders. He has worked in the field and taught science at all levels across North and South America. His passion for restoration stems from witnessing firsthand the extent of ecosystem degradation around the world and is a driving force behind his work with the Phoenix Conservancy. Please join me in welcoming Chris Duke. See if I can, and he'll get his presentation up here.
In theory.
Yeah, in theory.
Hopefully I've done it.
It's there, and I think yeah. And is there any way you can just have your slide? Or do you like to see this?
I'll let the slides if I can.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so we're gonna
Something like that.
Yeah. Okay. Pass that to you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Preston, and thank you all for having me. It's really nice to make the trek and to get the invitation to speak to you all. I always love talking to people that have an appreciation for native plants. And for Palouse Prairie and actually know what it is. So that's not gonna work, is it? Well, might as well just do it that way. But yeah, as Preston said, I'm here to talk a little bit about some of our work down in a little bit closer to the heart of the Palouse region and why we have settled as a restoration organization on really focusing on these small urban prairies. So today I'm hoping to introduce Phoenix to those that don't know of us, talk a little bit about our urban prairies and really focus on that. And if we have time, hopefully talk about biochar, which is an awful lot of fun as well. So the very, very abbreviated history of Phoenix Conservancy. If you haven't heard of us, that's not overly surprising. We don't do a lot of self-publicizing. We really have just channeled into what we do. So we need to be better about that. But for those of us who, if those of you who haven't heard of us, we are based in Pullman, founded there in 2016. I am one of the co-founders, as Preston mentioned, and our mission is to restore endangered ecosystems. And we have a dual focus on biodiversity and communities. And where that's really come into play is in our first three flagship ecosystems, which everybody looks at that and they go, what in the world connects Palouse Prairie, Great Plains Prairie, and Madagascar rainforest? And that seemingly scattered approach is actually very, very tightly focused on a couple of things. I guess this is trying to automatically go. Yeah, let me see if I can find a way to stop that while I keep talking. But um, there. What ties them all together is they are very highly biodiverse. Palouse Prairie, of course, being one of the very unique 4 dominant prairies, of which there are only a handful scattered around the globe. Conditions that create that are very uncommon. Not only just biodiverse, but in very, very serious danger of extinction. So we wanted to start where it was most needed. And then finally, starting from nothing and starting from an idea, you have to be very pragmatic, we feel, about what you can do and where you can start and have an actual measurable impact. That was a very important decision for us because it's really guided where we are now and where we've been able to grow since our founding. I'm very happy to say that we're going to be pulling in 3 new ecosystems. We've been growing pretty regularly since that point, but we still maintain this focus on where we can have the greatest impact and, really importantly, elevating Palouse Prairie onto the same scale as something like rainforest restoration. And pragmatism has really kind of driven what we've done. And that has also been very, very closely tied to the idea that restoring an ecosystem can only really stick if you can somehow address the issues that cause the degradation in the first place. And this is very apparent someplace like Madagascar, but what we really don't do is try to move in to an area and first require ideological alignment. So what you're seeing is one of our crew teams in Madagascar. Our focus has been on creating jobs to build firebreak. The main scourge of Madagascar rainforest, as with rainforests everywhere, is fire set by humans. And so a logical first step would be to walk in and say, hey, stop, please stop. It's not helping anything. That's a good way to put yourself directly at ideological right angles to the people that depend on the ecosystem and need to work with you. So our focus there has been very much fixed on what the major community need is. In this particular community, average annual income per family is around $100. So the starting point is making sure that we're addressing some of those very serious economic issues while pragmatically adjusting instead of starting with ideology first. So I guess I already kind of talked about this, but that's where we ended up with our 3 ecosystems. We have these criterion and, most importantly, places where we can ultimately have a pragmatic impact. And today I'm going to talk to you primarily about Palouse Prairie, which, again, seemingly scattered, but very, very much cohesive is where we were. I don't know how many times you all have gotten this question, but whenever we bring forward restoration, there's always at least one. And as a lifelong teacher, I feel like I can pick this kid out of the audience usually. So, okay, well, restoration. Well, where are you going? Where are you going back to? You going back to here? Because that, or hey, how about a little further? And we always find it very fruitful and very important to make sure that we really define what we mean by restoration. Our job, as we view it, is not going back in time. It is very much a biological shorthand of the Red Queen, in which every organism on Earth is running as fast as it can to stay right where it is. And the faster things change, the harder it is to keep up. So our goal and our view is not to go back, but to buy our native plants and our native ecosystems time to catch up. So when we define restoration, we define it as return to a healthy, functional, maximum state with maximal extant native biodiversity and minimal extinction rates. So we're not bringing back mammoths anytime soon. And with the Palouse Prairie in particular, that is, I always struggle with the alliteration of Palouse Prairie, Pocket Prairies. So if I stumble a little bit, I apologize. There's a lot of P alliteration coming through here. Our main goal is to really start where we have the opportunities, and a lot of that is in people's yards. So people that want to stop watering lawn, for example, or to bring this ecosystem to their front yards is where we've really started with Pocket Prairies. We also have started working with a number of what we refer to as tier one restoration sites. So these are intact areas of Palouse Prairie. So that would be places like Steptoe, Kamiak, Wheelan. We work either with invasive species removal in the case of Steptoe in collaboration with state parks and BLM. And Wheelan, same thing. It's usually invasive species coming into these things that we're trying to keep out. And then also working towards native plant material production. And as I said, if I have time, I'll talk a little bit about the Palouse biochar project that we're working on. And also, again, trying to address that native plant shortage that we face. But with Palouse Prairie in particular, we face these major three issues. And the first one is lifelong residents of the Palouse. You can often walk up to them and say, well, we work in Palouse Prairie. And they go, oh, like weed. And we say, no, no. And this is the longstanding joke of Steptoe Butte is that everybody goes right to the top of Steptoe Butte, looks out and misses the view, which is at their feet. And that is one of the major shreds of Palouse Prairie still in existence, but very few people know what it is or appreciate it for what it is. I know who I'm talking to, so I don't have to talk to you about plant blindness and why that's such a problem, but the complete inability to see native plants is kind of where this starts. Not only that, but as I was talking about with Preston earlier, one of the major things is if somebody walked up to me and said, you have infinite money and infinite land, restore, go, fix it. I can't. And the reason I can't is because we don't have enough seeds in existence. We don't have enough plants in existence, which is not totally surprising considering there's less than 1% of the original biome intact. So even if you wanted to flip the switch, we just don't have the materials yet. And then last but not least, as has been really underscored by this last month, major funding can be elusive and or transient. So having that low irregular funding for restoration and the very high cost, considering that we have very few native plants and native seeds, can be an obstacle in addition to fragmentation and low total area. So where do we start and why are we doing this? The major goal here in terms of the Phoenix Conservancy's view on how to restore Palouse Prairie in a way that is actually functional, that it'll actually behave and start operating like an ecosystem again instead of fragments, is initially by starting out with functional connectivity. And what I mean by that is this is more of like an island biogeography context. If you think of the Palouse at this stage as a few large islands separated by a biological desert, which is high intensity agriculture. And I'm not, for the record, denigrating high intensity agriculture. It's just not a place where many of our creatures can live. The first step is creating small islands to hop between, and that is a precursor for gene flow, for pollinators. Otherwise, you basically have what we would expect on an island or what has been really carefully documented on places like deforested areas where we work, where you have this small patch of extremely isolated habitat and species loss just slowly marches towards the center without any ability to talk to the other islands. So that's where we're really starting, working towards structural connectivity. So places like Eastern Washington, creating these new islands, these large islands as they appear. We are starting very much here, not only to start creating these tiny little islands along road cuts, unused pieces of land, people's front yards, but also as a precursor to start generating seed sources so that we can start creating some of these larger islands. So that's our rough strategy. And for us, it begins here. I want to also be very, very clear, that's not our terminology. We did not invent the term Pocket Prairie. I went digging. I couldn't find anything before 1995. Maybe somebody said it, but I just want to be very clear. This is not ours. We just have simply adopted this terminology, and it is from a lot of different places with prairie. But we use that to refer to usually less than 1 acre restoration sites that are knitted into the urban landscape. And that can be front yards, landscaping for urban buildings of any kind. We work with waste disposal services, schools. I won't go through the entire list, but a lot of them. And again, the goal is to start not only creating that functional connectivity, but perhaps the most important thing is that people start seeing these native plants as every single day. Not, I have to go out to this tiny little cemetery that didn't get plowed under in the middle of nowhere, but I see them in my front yard. I can start recognizing them. And we use that as a precursor to start saying, okay, go find, see how many of them you see anywhere in the Palouse and report back. And they always say, well, I've never seen, what is that? I've never seen that in my entire life, that Elkhorn's Clarkie. It's really, really common in some places, but just not everywhere. So that's kind of our starting point. And we see a lot of opportunity even in places like this. So this is quite literally where we started, is places like parking lots. There's very little reason that that can't host, not exactly the same because it's a very, very complicated ecosystem in terms of the soil microbes and everything else, but it can host many of the native plant species. So that's really where we started. And again, that is where we have really, really planted our flag, is not expecting everything to look like that, but ultimately at least enough places. So where this looks like, this is one of our landowners who gave us permission to use this, but this is right across the street from another place we work, which is Kamiak Elementary. So when I'm starting to talk about functional connectivity, the nice thing about Pullman is most of our sites are within a mile of each other, or at least within a mile of another site. And so that gives a lot of opportunities for pollinators and things that are mobile to move between them. This person got tired of looking at lawn, and for a long time, it looked like that. And there was a lot of really careful reassurance that said, Terry, I'm not growing dirt. I promise, I promise, I promise, I promise. March rolled around. Terry, I'm not growing dirt. I promise, I promise. July rolled around. Terry's getting nervous. And then suddenly in August, she was no longer growing. She literally left for a vacation, came back, and there it was. And so it's nice to be able to reward patience like that. But if you really squint your eyes, there's not a huge difference in terms of just driving down the street. But if you know what you're looking at, there is a massive difference between this and what was there. What you can see scattered throughout is blanket flower, flax. She actually has a depression right there where she put a rock. There's a little pocket of camas that you can't see this time of year, of course, but they come up every spring. Joey milkweed, and so on and so on. I'm sorry. Yes. Yep. We did. So all those little patches of black dust, whenever this was taken, unfortunately, this was taken after a windy day. That's biochar. So one of the major things that we have stumbled backwards into is biochar. Um, we'll bookmark that because I will be right there. It is a very important soil ameliorant. As I'm sure everybody who's tried to do this knows, I basically went down to subsoil, so we had to do something to give them a toehold. I'll talk to you about biochar. I'm not a true acolyte, I will say. I'm not really a true believer. I am a enthusiastic but skeptical adoptee of biochar. So all the sod went here. So this was a really fun topographical thing that the landowner wanted more than just a flat topography. So a lot of the organic matter that was tied up in the sod, we kept on site, staked it down, and created basically a sod roll berm, and then topsoiled it. And then that's why you can see these. I don't know if you can get a sense, but most of those showy milkweed, somewhere around here from seed in 1 year. So the soil under there is great, but yes.
Wow. Did you, well, I'm assuming you had to water this to
Yes.
start.
Yes. And that would be our preference not to, but Terry did want to get going in
Yeah.
quick order. Water is our concern for sure, down in the Palouse. So we don't prefer to do that if we can avoid it, but certainly help things along. And yeah, for a very long time, Terry was watering dirt. It's just, please,
It takes a while.
please.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I went out and talked to the seeds for a while. as my respected colleagues say, please, you gotta get moving, please. Anyhow, another question we get a lot: does this actually matter? Why are you working somebody's yard? You're supposedly doing restoration. And I say, well, yeah, I am, and here's why. This is one of the more frightening things, but obviously we've carried over that aesthetic of this is what a well manicured yard looks like from a completely different climate than is appropriate for most of the Western United States, at least. In a lot of places in the East, you can maintain a lawn just by mowing over and over. It just doesn't work that way here. So trying to do that really does matter in converting it to something in terms of water use. But not only that, there's plenty of articles that I don't need to go into, but this is what we think about. So our Palouse Prairie manager is an entomologist by training, and some of our most important and prolific native pollinators are easily missed. Our little perditas are just tiny little things, but they do the heavy lifting compared to something that's much more obvious, even like a bumblebee. And their home ranges can be as small from as 1,000 square feet, which is not a very big lawn. So if your entire world consists of something like that, it means everything. And for something like a bumblebee, able to move between these islands or some of the larger vertebrates that are able to do that too, it really does matter. And again, we're not the only people that have thought of this. Every road cut that I see between, for example, here and Pullman, where I just came from this morning, as I go up and down 95 or 195, I see one of those road cuts, and one of those paired road cuts is almost equivalent to one of the most important cemeteries we still have in Palouse Prairie in existence, which is Wheelan Cemetery. Tiny little fragment. So it matters quite a lot. And if you've been to Wheelan and you've seen it full bloom, it doesn't really matter if it's 100 square feet or a square mile for some of these organisms. And here's why, at least in part, it's one of my favorite things that's happening. So on the right, you have weed. On the left, I believe that is big blue stem. So it's not, it's sort of adjacent. We have it certainly out in the Great Plains, but very representative of what we have in Palouse Prairie as well. My favorite thing to do is to try to get somebody to conceptualize arrowleaf balsam roots and as an upside down tree. So find a 15-foot tree and say, okay, that straight down. And trying to really get that through and saying this is one of the major things that it does is not only provide ways to get through the soil. Our windblown loess is very, very fine particle and packs very tightly. And therefore, it's most of our rain until it gets saturated, just goes right off. This gives it ways to go much deeper. Not only that, but we use it for erosion control and turbidity control in a very pragmatic sense for Pullman disposal, pollinator wildlife, carbon sequestration, and about everything else that you could think of, including a very fun little critter. I absolutely love our urban foxes in Pullman. That's a relatively recent phenomenon, but we have a growing population of urban red fox that makes use of these tiny little areas. I just saw his, it's a male that comes by and sings underneath our bedroom every night, which I wish he wouldn't do that. But he's clearly using it very, very carefully. And he's been out in my front yard just a little bit ago as per all the snow and tracks and doing some very good hunting. But other organisms like great horned owls, my resident owl likes to leave rabbit bits for me to find in my yard too. So these little pieces do matter, and it's amazing how well they find them. You would think that there would just be no way that this tiny little area, which for the record is my front yard when it was a very, very young pocket prairie, there's no way they would find them. But somehow it just draws wildlife like a magnet. I don't know how they do it. Case in point. This was probably, I think this might be one of my very favorite moments working with Phoenix at all. One of our very first pocket prairie owners is from Lewiston area and had been looking for monarch butterfly in the Palouse his entire life. And now in his 50s, he saw his very first one and called me at like 6 in the morning, almost in tears because it had come to his pocket prairie. That was the first one he had ever seen. This was a female and not only fed, and this is his photo. So Jake Leachman took this photo of her feeding on a variety of different flowers and then laying eggs on one of his milkweeds. And that was within 1 year. So I don't know how she found it. I have no idea. But they do in a very strange and amazing way. So we have a number of sites across all of them, 73. That figure's a little outdated. We're knocking on the door of 85 now. Species established across all these different sites. We've grown from 2 to 30. This year, we're going to be adding another 14 sites, I believe. And it's really catching on in terms of what the benefits could be. And not only that, Jake's just thrilled that he doesn't have to water anymore. This takes care of itself. And from our perspective, this is another figure that needs to be updated, but really importantly, these are seed collection sites for us. This is basically creating an urban seed bank that at the end of the year, your average landowner would just mow them, clean up the yard, compost the seeds or whatever. Our crew comes back and collects these seeds, which originate from wild local ecotypes. And so that's being not only all these advantages, but it's also really starting to address some of the major issues that we have with native seeds. So this is, again, not comprehensive. We had one landowner that was infatuated with Neveridia, which I do not know why, because and Amincinkia too. I don't know if Amincinkia and Neveridia are as far north or not. They're one of those categories of native plants that I feel like I'm forced to love because they're native and they're very popular with pollinators, but they're really unpleasant to pick. They're they've got these irritating hairs anyway. So we have some landowners which for some reason like plants that not many would appreciate, but in many cases, landowners just want something that's going to look nice, it's going to be no maintenance. At least that's where they start. And then as they start seeing this stuff come online and seeing new blooms, I get pictures all the time from landowners, seeds that we planted 4 years ago now. Their first lomatium bloomed. And lomatium is all of them are moving targets because they have this weird staggered germination where they take multiple winters to truly go through the whole germination process. So whenever something new pops up, suddenly the landowners are very interested in what they are seeing. And this is just a non-comprehensive list of what we have going so far. But as I said, the major advantage is from wild collection science, we stringently stick to very, very stingy protocols to make sure that we're not having any sort of impact on the wild populations. We would prefer to never collect from wild populations, but that's where we have to start. In these pocket prairies, we can be much more liberal with what we take. So it does offer a lot higher yield in terms of seed collection and also more or less eliminates our need to do any wild collection whatsoever, which is excellent. But not only that, like I said, opportunities for landowner participation and Jessica's aster. Formal collection of some species like Jessica's aster is just not possible. Jessica's aster, if you're not familiar with it, is one of the most viciously aggressive rare species that I don't understand at all. If you have the pleasure of encountering Jessica's asters in the wild, very, very uncommon. Certainly, I think they were threatened, or at least are threatened in Washington, almost entirely extirpated. Now that we have access to them from one landowner that had them and had cultivated Jessica's asters, we put them on the front line with reed canary grass. They win. I have no idea how they became rare, but we can't collect them from the wild, but now we don't have to, which is ideal. Some remaining obstacles, not everybody wants to go all in, and it does take some money to do sod removal. It does take some money to get the materials, seeds, and so on. Our partial solution to that is this thing that we're referring to as micro-prairies, which is kind of like a out-of-the-box, preset certain area. This particular one is the Perditas, I believe it's 5 feet in diameter, but it has X individuals with an overseed of a high diversity mix. So for somebody who just has a tiny little area they want to try, it's a lot less money. The big thing is timeline management, really helping people understand that we can't just go dig up that beautiful clump of sunflowers that you see in the hillside because that arrowleaf balsam root is probably 40 to 60 years old and we can't move it. So making sure that people are really aware of how long it takes for these things to get going Not only helps when they say, why are you growing dirt for a year, but also why doesn't it look like the wild thing? It does a really good job of instilling why the wild thing matters so much. It's because it does not happen when you just snap your fingers. They're that tall, but that doesn't mean you can grow them overnight. So changing those timelines is really important. The awareness comes with understanding that we are around and we do this. And also, as we keep growing, capacity and staffing is always an issue. We are already booked through next spring, just because we have a small staff and the demand has been growing. So good problems to have. But as we start working towards native plant production generally, the biggest thing that we're working on is trying to address this chronic shortage. And this is not unique to us. This is every ecosystem on Earth that is being restored. There's a really good report that came out a couple of years ago by NASEM, so National Academy of Sciences, Engineering and Mathematics, which seems like a strange group to be putting out a seed study. But they were assessing, well, why isn't restoration moving faster in places like Utah, where there's these huge swaths of area where you could be restoring? And the answer that's come back across the board is we just don't have enough plants or seeds, period. So really addressing that seems like it wouldn't be a big thing, but that's the major thing that we're doing for Fort Pierre National Grassland in South Dakota. They have 6,000 acres that they have got a good burn regime on, but they just have they have no seeds. They have no one to produce local ecotype seeds, which is what we're doing. So not only that, but following cultivation that's already been established, it really does a wonderful job of addressing these things. We were kickstarted by another chapter of the Native Plant Society. White Pine gave us some of our very first grants and our very first support to start this process, as well as Palouse Prairie Foundation. So we really owe them a never-ending debt of gratitude for giving us our first sort of step towards that. We're hoping to build very, very quickly from that, as we've been just given this wonderful place that we're referring to as the Nest, which is an undeveloped piece of land just over the Idaho border in Latah County. To date, and again, this is still a little out of date, but just to give you an idea as to what it means to be able to grow our own plants, we've raised approximately 23,000 individuals from a lot of different species. Many of them, as you can see, are grass, as kind of the bones of the prairie, but a lot of different forage species. It adds up quite a lot. If we bought them at wholesale prices, we would not exist as a nonprofit. So this does mean quite a lot. And we're hoping to have that effect for a number of different nonprofits as well. And I said I'd show you Jess. There it is. This tiny, vulnerable, aggressive, irrepressible native plant. Apparently very rare. I don't understand, because that's probably 2 or 3 feet tall within a year in good conditions. So if you have a chance to get acquainted, Jess is a wonderful creature. But this is one of our goals, is to keep expanding the nest and really focusing on unusual plants, species that often get overlooked, not really seen, but are very important for the overall biodiversity. And then again, trying to really use this as a launching point for public schools. We do have an AmeriCorps team that is theoretically coming online this year, although there's some doubt surrounding that, considering it's federally funded. But assuming we can find a way to weave in that system, this will be basically bringing these to schools and having people throughout our region, school children, working with that. Okay, so I do have a little bit of time to talk about biochar, which is good. So biochar. What indeed? We stumbled backwards into this because we ended up with trucks. This is, if anybody works for U-Haul, don't tell them what we do with their trucks. But we didn't originally have a vehicle of our own, and so we would often come away from a restoration site with something that looks like this. And each of those burlap sacks is stuffed with things like rush skeleton weed. Well, less so with rush skeleton weed because manual remover doesn't do much with it, but spotted knapweed has been a major focus on step-toe butte. I'm very happy to say that it is almost completely eradicated after 5 years of very intensive efforts. Spotted diffuse knapweed and their ugly little hybrid. We end up with lots and lots and lots and lots of waste that we can't do anything with. It's stuffed with seeds. It's otherwise something, if there's a root fragment, it can restart itself Rosa canina is a major issue for us on Steptoe Butte. We have to be very careful with what we do with those fragments because we could just exacerbate the problem somewhere else. So what we ran into is we have to either put them in a dump or burn them, both of which seem like a really bad idea for a conservation-based nonprofit. We're just spinning our wheels. And so we found this wonderful thing called pyrolysis as an alternate originally for disturbing or disposing of a bunch of biomass we didn't want anymore. And if you'd like to tumble down one of the most interesting rabbit holes out there, biochar is fantastic. So I definitely would encourage people to look into it. But what it is, there's no mystery at all. It is carbon-rich, solid residues, leftovers subjecting biomass to very high heat and very low oxygen. In other words, charcoal. There's no difference between that and what we produce here, except for the purpose. The feedstock can change things quite a lot, but the same basic molecular structures that are forced, it's an alternate to combustion. So a lot of that carbon that otherwise becomes methane and carbon dioxide becomes this instead.
So do you burn it in like a closed container of some kind to keep, so there's.
So you all know how to make biochar by the time you walk out of here. It's great. And another wonderful kicker, this just basic, if you just general basic chemistry, the higher the temperature and the higher the energy input, the more energetic conformations you can force. If you process at very high temperatures, you can create biochar that remains stable in soil for anywhere from a few hundred to a few thousand years. So this is a really interesting option for non-trivial carbon sequestration, and you can make it out of anything. There's a lot of stuff you can find online about what biochar does. It's this miracle that does blah, 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 blah. It does one thing, and it only does one thing, but it does it really well, which is absorb anything dissolved in water, particularly. Biochar typically has a very negatively charged surface, and it typically has lots and lots of these pores, which have basically act as really tiny capillaries. So depending on the feedstock and the processing temperature, biochar can absorb somewhere between 3 to 4 times its volume equivalent in water, sometimes less. So don't quote me on that. It's highly variable, but 1 tiny gram of this stuff can have as much as 1,000 square feet or 200 square feet of surface area in 1 gram of char. So it's astonishing, but of all the things people say that it can do, and it can do a lot of stuff, it really just does one thing very, very well, which is absorb. So when you asked if we had done any soil amelioration, we did, and that was almost entirely to absorb water and to maintain it in the soil. One of the other very important benefits of this is it does prevent leaching of nutrients. It does so by absorbing them and holding onto them very, very tightly. In addition, this is kind of like a hamster habit for soil microbes. Within a very short period of time, that is just covered in microbes. So in areas where soil compaction is an issue, it avoids that because it holds it open. It does not act as a fertilizer. So before everybody runs out and puts it in your garden, it will suck nutrients out of the soil initially, unless it is charged or pre-saturated with nutrients first. So that's where the rubber kind of hits the road with biochar. It does one thing.
What did you do with that water? Did you pre-treat it?
Soaked it in a wheelbarrow with some Miracle-Gro overnight.
Sure.
Yep.
Okay.
I mean, with water too, but absorbed it like a sponge. And so what we did then is ground it up, put it out there, and it was really interesting to see it. I wish we had gotten a picture of this. Invariably, seed germination happened where there were little depressions that collected the biochar. And that's almost entirely due to the idea that this stuff is a sponge. It just holds water.
Buy this stuff commercially?
Yes, you can. Right, I know. And the thing is, it's I don't have time to go all the way into it today. I am sort of going down a rabbit hole here, but it's thousands and thousands of years old. This is not a new thing. But the act of burying char in the soil to retain moisture, prevent compaction, and do a whole bunch of offsetting things, including microbe content, has been going on in the Amazon for thousands of years. So a lot of the indigenous communities were able to farm the same land over and over and over instead of slash and burn because of this. So really cool. It's been rediscovered. And as I said, there is a sprawling rabbit hole if you want to start going down this stuff with biochar. The real kicker for us is you can make it out of anything biological. So we are able to turn weed seeds and weed biomass into something that we can then use to enrich the soil in our Pocket Prairie sites, which is what you saw in action there at that last prairie.
Then it kills all the weed seeds that's in it.
Our mean temperature of our kiln is somewhere between probably about 1,000 Fahrenheit. So whatever that translates to, 300 something Celsius. One of the really cool kilns that I've seen can get up to a few thousand Celsius. So it's a real, if you find me a seed that survives that, I think it deserves to. Anyhow, this is a very shorthand diagram of our take on biochar, why we focus on it. It is not fertilizer. That is the biggest misconception. I'm going to put it on my ground and it will fertilize it. No, it will not. In fact, the first thing it'll do is it'll mop up all nutrients that it can get its hands on. So it is important if you're using it in that application, saturate it first. It is a sponge. It will hold on to water. It will absolutely provide habitat for soil microbes. It prevents compaction, does a lot of really miracle things, but it does not fertilize. It will add organic matter to the soil, which will slowly decompose over whatever the timeline of your individual biochar feedstock is. The nicest thing about it is in fact something you can do anywhere on Earth. This is not true of a lot of other potential climate mitigation strategies where growing kelp, growing algae. The answer as to where you can do that is not everywhere. Biochar you can do absolutely everywhere. We could do it outside. I do it. No, I don't. I've never done this in my yard, in my fire pit. I've never officially done that. But I'll show you how you can do it if you were to. It's also not universal. So I don't want to encourage the idea that it fixes everything automatically, no matter what kind of soil it is. It tends to be alkaline due to ash content. It does not fix every soil. For example, if you're trying to dry out saturated soil, it's just going to make it worse. And as I said, it doesn't necessarily work like fertilizer, nor do we believe in silver bullets. We don't believe this is the one true solution to soil health. I don't believe it's the one true solution to climate change. But I do believe it is an extremely powerful potential tool and a very basic tool that everybody should probably be doing with that massive pile of brush that is outside every single rural house in Whitman County, I promise. Not to say that it is the only thing that you can do. I would say it's going to be very hard to build a building with only a hammer, but it's also incredibly difficult to build a building without a hammer. So, powerful tool, very, very important. Here's how you make it. Nothing to it except setting the fire on top. So basically, if you have a major brush pile, most people will set it from the bottom. The idea of fire is going to travel up and then burn everything away. It can be as simple as setting the brush pile on fire on top, and then the heat from that starts heating the biomass that's under there that is excluded from oxygen. And here's what it looks like. And there's something, and this is a very basic form. I should point out this is not efficient. This is 10 to 1, so biomass to biochar production. This is the least efficient but simplest way to make it. Just light the fire on top. There's something very unusual about this fire, as opposed to every other brush pile I've ever seen. It's almost smokeless. And the reasoning behind that is what you are doing when you start it on top like this is the heat is permeating through the biomass. And if you want to think about it as composting and fast forward, it's starting to release a lot of compounds like methanes, a lot of flammable things that are referred to collectively as syngas. So the fire on top of this is not burning primarily wood, it's primarily burning syngas, in other words, natural gas. And when it really gets kicking, it's amazing. It's like a giant Bunsen burner. But the only thing that's different is lighting it on top versus on the bottom. And it does produce at least some quantum of biochar. If you want to go a little more high tech, this is our favorite toy. This is a biochar kiln, and it's same principles, a flame cap on top to mop up all that syngas. The methanes and other flammable gases that are released get the heat going. That works its way through the biomass. What you're left with at the bottom is a lot of biochar.
Just like an open burning barrel.
Yeah. And if you really want to get me going, you should ask me what Washington's former regulations around this kiln were until last year. Mind bending. I'm happy to say Washington came to their senses. We can now use our kiln in Washington State, but we could use it in Idaho too. Um, it was outlawed for that reason. It looks superficially like an enormous burn barrel. Major differences in how the mechanics of this thing works. This is a ring of fire kiln from Cave Junction, Oregon. Yep.
What size is that?
About 10. Ours is, we got a bigger one. So ours is about 10 feet in diameter. So it's fun.
It's
Yep.
not just a barrel, it's a special.
To be perfectly honest, there is nothing stopping anybody with some basic welding skills from, we actually did make a different version of this called a Kontiki, but it is literally just a ring of steel dug into the ground just a little bit. Dug. Totally. Well, no bottom, so it is pulling in a very tiny amount of oxygen from under, but we also dig it in so that it's not pulling oxygen from underneath, which would just be combustion. Yep, just about that much. What it is doing is it's a retort. So this is actually a flame shield, the rim around the outside. And Kelpie Wilson, the person who makes this, would probably slap me because I'm going to mischaracterize this, but the basic function is that oxygen is pulled up from either from the bottom or from the inside, and uses that as the fuel for the combustion of the syngas, but not, again, the actual burning of the biomass. So the oxygen coming into the sides of this thing that's running the combustion, it's just burning off the syngas. There is some combustion with this kiln. We have about a 3-to-1 ratio instead of 10-to-1. So 3 yards of biomass for 1 yard of biochar. If you want to get very fancy, yeah, this is what you can buy me for Christmas if you want. It's not bad. It's a mere $300,000, but this is a continuous pyrolyzer over which you have a lot more control over exact specifics and therefore the char that comes out. But it does have a hopper that you can see at the top, and you can feed up ground pelletized anything. And it basically uses its own syngas that you can see collecting there and then running it back through the system to keep that temperature at a nice constant wherever you want it to be. If you're trying to sequester stuff for longer, higher temperatures force these carbon structures, those roughly hexagonal pores that you saw, are actually really complicated sheets of lots of different carbon structures. Graphene, and I forget what else, but there's a ton of different stuff that goes into it. The higher the temperature, the more complex the structure, the more resistant it is to decay. A lot of things that are a little bit more herbaceous, so feedstocks like wheat or weeds, tend to not have as resistant to biochar to decay. So they're better for something like agriculture because they only last for 100-ish years in soil. But in our neck of the woods, the most appealing thing and the best way we can say it is you don't have to believe in climate change. You don't even have to believe in carbon for this to work. But if you are interested in improving your grandchildren's soil, one application, it will be there more or less permanently. So fun trick. And that gave rise to the Phoenix Biochar Project, which is what we're doing a little further down. Is not only are we sort of scratching our own itch and getting rid of invasive species, we have gotten a very clear feedback from the community that says, I've got this pile of brush. I get big piles of leaves. I don't like taking them to the dump. What can I do with them? In response to that, we're working on setting up demonstrations. So having a roving crew that can come to rural residents and show you how to make it. Again, that feels silly because I just showed you how to make it. So there you go. You can get a little more fancy than that, but it really just is as simple as having a campfire that you light from the top instead of from the bottom. But not only trainings, but also having a drop site where people can drop off biomass if they don't want anymore, and also a point of sale for biochar if they want to try it out. So that's all in the works. In addition to all of that on our horizons on a much longer term focus, this is some of the stuff that we're working on at this stage. Yeah, we'll see. 2 or 3 of those were dependent on government grants. So we'll hold our breath on that one for now. But to leave you with perhaps what I think is probably the most easy shorthand for why what we do matters. I don't really know exactly who to attribute this to because I've heard it from a lot of different people now. So if I've misquoted or don't know who it came from, I apologize. But it is a really good quote, which is that it's not the presence of non-native plants that is the problem. It doesn't matter if you have a love of hydrangeas, or in my case, some, I don't know why I keep trying. I can't get gladiolas to grow in Pullman. I don't know why. Everybody else can. Can't. I just try. This is August. They're not supposed to look like that in August. But behind it, you can see some non-native cultivars of Alstroemeria and iris and everything else. But on this side of the stairwell, you can see a facsimile of a native prairie. There are 25 species in that, not in that little purview, but in that section of my yard. They don't have to be one or the other. They don't have to be all or nothing, and it doesn't have to be huge because it's not having other stuff there that's the problem. It's not having the native plants, which is a problem. So to tie everything up, hopefully with a nice red bow, pocket prairies or something like it, just having native plants in your yard, even if it's just a few of them, can mean life or death to a lot of things that are co-involved with it. And for that, I will thank everyone for hearing a bit about Phoenix Conservancy and our work and why we do what we do, and happy to take any questions. Thank you for your time.
Time for questions. Shout them out.
Sure. Never sure where to start, but
Start.
okay.
Excellent presentation, great concepts.
Thanks.
I think, starting small, scaling up is the way to go. You have to. Do you have any vision of being able to scale it up to either parcels of public land, whether it's state, federal, or other, or like a land trust acquire conservation rights on private land to again scale up to increase the connectivity or size of island?
Yes. Yes, we do. However, I'm going to play that one very close to the chest, given the times I find myself in. But yeah, absolutely. So what I can't talk about without enraging my board is that we do have an increasing number of people that have larger pieces of land that are former ag land or whatever. There, we have a couple of landowners that are retiring farmers, and they said, "Look, like it's raised several generations. My kids don't want to farm. I want this to be something they can always visit. I want them to see what it was, like what I remembered." We are starting to work there. As I said, the limitation is still, it wouldn't matter if I had all the money all the time. But what I can say for anybody that is on larger land, if you want to go do it yourself, our strategy that we're working towards is, I think, as a general concept, we operate under move as slowly as you have to without losing ground. And so we would rather focus on a smaller area for now and really have that be a very dense native population, and then use that as seed sources to double the size next year and then double it again the other year and so on. So it does take time. I can say that we are working towards in-ground seed production at the nest and a couple of other sites, which should really help. I love in-ground seed production. Is fantastic. JC Jensen has got it right. If anybody knows JC here or heard her name, you lose some seed to birds and weevils and things, but I mean, there's no difference really functionally between ground production and a restored area. So that's where we're going. Yes, we are. I will have my kneecaps broken by my president of my board if I say much more.
Might not be able to answer this one, but
Okay.
I'll throw it out there.
Sure.
Will there be a day we see the return of the giant earthworm?
It's already there. It's still there. So they're hard to study because obviously they don't get up and wander around very much. I've seen increasing reports. It's certainly still in some of the fragments and holding on. There is increasing suggestion that the Palouse giant earthworm might be a lot more widespread than we thought it was. I've heard reports of something, a study that came out of Winthrop area that said, I kind of looks like a Palouse giant earthworm. Why is it here? So they don't like being plowed. So in areas where we have at least the possibility of connectivity, and again, it's very strange to think of it this way, but some of the most stable places that are unlikely to be turned over again are areas associated with apartment complexes that need them for landscaping purposes. They have to leave these areas over, stormwater drainage, road cuts. I would also say yes. I think it's very possible. Um, I think in their case, they're probably a lot less mobile than, say, our foxes, so they may take some more concentrated reintroduction. Um, but I don't see a reason why not. And honestly, not to go too far on a tangent, but the Palouse region and this whole region generally is accustomed to absolute cataclysms over and over. Um, we have a lot of soil now that's been deposited over thousands of years, but just underneath our soil is miles of basalt, and that area has been buried multiple times. So I don't think it'll be the same, and I don't think there's any point in a very practical point of view that it will never be the same. But I do think that something else can come. And I think a lot of our organisms that have been evolving here for millions of years are not fans of giant cataclysms like floods and ice ages, but they are at very least adapted to coming back from them. So, so there.
Dan, you have a question?
So at Home Depot, they sell these fire pits for the garden and other garden stores, and you advertise them as smokers. Are those essentially a biochar reactor?
Depends on how they are fueled. Some of them are hooked up to a propane tank. But yeah, that's basically a scaled down cone tiki biochar kiln. So that is why I've never done this, but I do have a fire pit at my house, and it was patently illegal to try to produce biochar in an urban context. I am, however, allowed to have a recreational bonfire. Mind-bendingly, it can be up to 10 feet in diameter. Bonfire, even within the city limits, as long as it uses clean, dry firewood. I won't go down that rabbit hole any further. Suffice to say, you are allowed to have a campfire, and how you choose to light it is up to you. So if one were to do something like this, and they had small diameter biomass, for example, brush or something like that they wanted to turn into biochar, I would simply lay down a bed of it and then just build a fire like you normally would. Easy as. And whether or not it's totally smokeless or not, it'll depend on the exact mechanics, but maybe that's what they're doing. I don't know.
So we are not, like our house is not Palouse Prairie.
Mhm.
It was not originally Palouse Prairie. But if we wanted to turn, our soil and amend it and create something that wasn't originally, 15,000 years ago, was very flood happened. But is that acceptable, or does it need to be low soil and the stuff in moss?
You guys are baiting me. This is it's yet another rabbit hole and a really good conversation that we could go on for a while. What the concept of what constitutes native and whether it's okay or not is a spiraling rabbit hole. And the best thing that I could say is that it depends only on who you talk to. The idea of geographic range shifts is that Palouse Prairie was, again, yeah, like you're saying before, 2 miles of water came boiling through here, was maybe here in a similar way. It's likely to shift north as climate change continues. So are you getting ahead of the curve, or are you introducing an alien species? It depends entirely on who you talk to, especially for something like a wind dispersed species like showy milkweed or some of the asters or goldenrods. We have them in common. What constitutes a local ecotype for a long distance wind dispersed species? could mean a lot. I mean, we don't really know exactly. I would say you are safest with species with the widest ranges. So if you wanted to create a facsimile of something like Palouse Prairie, I would say start with species with high wildlife value. So especially some spring bloomers and some fall bloomers. That's the big kicker, is to have those two, especially the fall bloomers. And then things that are wind dispersed, I think you can make a fair assumption that they're probably native to the area anyway. Um, I personally don't have any problem with it. And again, it's not necessarily if you add a species that's not here already, that's not really a problem, unless it starts competing with and it's smothering species that are already here. I don't see that happening with many of the Palouse Prairie species because their ranges are huge, and Palouse Prairie itself is this really interesting convergence ecosystem between a lot of species that can be found from Canada to Mexico. So I think you're in the clear, in short. But if you really want to go in the weeds on that, ask somebody else. See what they say about what native is.
Chris, we had an online question about what do you do about noxious weeds in prepping these pocket prairies? Like if they something like spotted knapweed. How do you handle those kind of situations?
Depends entirely on the species.
Yeah, okay.
So we're again consummate pragmatists. Rush skeleton weed does not respond to mechanical removal, nor does it respond to being asked nicely to leave. So we do use selective herbicides if we have to. Usually it's less of a problem. In urban context, if we're starting with lawn, it's just a matter of peeling off the sod. In wildland context, it is extremely dependent on what species we're fighting and how to get at it. For landowners and people that are not interested in using herbicides, they want to keep it away, even something relatively mild, we've increasingly started using clear solarization. So not black plastic, but a number of weed species. Whoop,
Maybe the battery.
did I lose it? Oh, it's gotten there. Our weed species are really dependent on light for germination. So if you put black plastic over it, it might kill a lot of the soil microbes. It may not kill some of the weeds. You can fork germinate by basically creating a tiny greenhouse over the top of them. We use that for poison hemlock is one of our big ones that we put that over the top of it to try to force as many of those seeds to germinate as possible. It's not as effective necessarily sometimes, but yeah, I'm sorry, it feels like an elusive answer, but it really depends on what we're starting with. If we're starting with lawn, it's really easy. We just run saw cutter.
Any last questions for Chris before we?
You had that on one of your plots, it took you 5 years to get rid of knapweed. How did you do that? Yeah.
Interns, volunteers, and persistence.
So did you spray?
Why not? Pull it?
No, handful. Handful. And that's like with step-toe butte. So if anybody knows the good Dr. Rich Bold or has heard that name whispered around, he is our wonderful, amazing, prickly sage of a man, just fantastic. And he was really kind of the leading force behind that. When we were very, very young as an organization, just looking, what can we do? What can we do that would matter? Rich was very good about saying, well, spotted knapweed just got a toehold at the top of the butte because everybody opens their cars and there you go. We basically every year for the past 5, 6 years now, right before the knapweed is about to bloom. So it's a biennial for one, which helps us. Right before it's about to bloom, our crews start at the top of the butte. If anybody's familiar with the topography, it's basically like a nautilus all the way down the butte. We'll start at the top and walk the butte, and every single knapweed that we find, rosette or blooming, hand pull it, get it off the butte. Yes, but they're biennial. So if you can, we've made a really substantial impact on that. I don't think that would work for some species. I know that would work for rush skeleton weed. So different set of problems, but that is the saving grace behind things like teasel, even poison hemlock being biennial. Poison hemlock's a little tricky because you can accidentally trigger it to be a perennial if you do it wrong. So gotta watch that. But when we do this is typically in July. So the soil's very dry and the season's starting to close around them. And we do I will not say that we get 100% of them, but we get enough of them each year so that there's less and less and less. I think we had one bag last year. So you just have to be very persistent with that one. I won't speak to invasive species. I'm not going to say that that would work with everyone, but spotted knapweed suffers under diligence and persistence.
Do you know of any charts that show, the different depths of different grasses?
There's different graphics that I've seen. We kind of made our own based on what we've gotten from papers. I don't know of like a go-to standard one. We should probably make one, or somebody should. But yeah.
Well, let's thank Chris. And if you if you've got any other questions you want to ask him, he's here. So just come on up. And everybody have a great day.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.